My name is Kathy Lang. With me is Betty Whitestein. We're in Harrison, Ohio today. It's March the 7th, 2003. We're interviewing Mr. Bob Richards. Bob, tell us where and when you were born, please.
I was born in Columbus, Ohio, October the 12th, 1926. I lived in Columbus until I went into the service, and I was always big for my age, so people would constantly say, well, why aren't you in the service? And I'm not old enough. So I made up my mind that I was going to join the service as soon as I could legally do so. And so the day before my 17th birthday, I went up to the Navy recruiting station in Columbus, and I took my physical examination. The day after my 17th birthday, I was sworn in, and the recruiting officer said, well, you have 5 days to get your affairs in order. I said, I'm ready to go now. So 2 days after I was 17, I was in Great Lakes Naval Training Station, and so I was there the October the 14th, and my company was 1584. I got out of boot camp December the 7th, which was an easy date to remember, of 1943. And I had 9 days leave, and I reported back to Great Lakes, and they sent me to radio school at Northwestern University, which is in Evanston, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. I was trying to get as far away from that boot camp as I could, but I was within 50 miles. At any rate, we lived at the radio school, we lived on the campus. There was about 1,000 sailors taking radio, and I happened to meet a fella that was a twin that I had gone to high school with, and his name was Bill Hafner. And so we greeted one another, and but he was in the company ahead of me. And so we got up to, well, near the completion of the course, and I had a very nice compliment from the professor that was teaching you to send International Morse Code. He said to the rest of the class, he says, now, when you get to the point that you can send like Richard, you can consider yourself a good radioman. Okay, we take final examinations. I passed everything but theory of radio, which is electricity. Well, I'd done so well that they thought, well, with all this training, we might as well keep you in radio. So they sent me to the Marine Corps, which was at Camp Pendleton, California. And we operated there on two-man teams, because everything, all the equipment was mobile. Because when you're moving with the Marines, why, everything is mobile. One radioman would carry the receiver and transmitter on his back, while the other person carried the hand crank generator to generate electricity so you could use the radio. Well, I had hand-to-hand combat there with the Marines, and it was a 2 months course. on mobile equipment. So at the completion of that, or at least I did get through that, 86 of us radiomen were transferred together as one unit up to Camp Parks, which is about 40 miles out of Oakland, California. And we stayed there for maybe 10 days. And there was a fellow that came, and he's going to take us down on 2 buses to Pier 99 in San Francisco. Now, he was a Navy man, but none of us knew him. And he was a second-class shipfitter. And I guess, well, I knew he had been overseas before. I did talk to him a little bit. But I guess he didn't feel too much like going back overseas, because he laid all of our records down on the dock, and he disappeared.
Now, was he supposed to go with you?
I don't know. I don't know whether he was just taking us there or what, but he was in charge. He had all of our records and everything, but at least he didn't lay all the records down, and we stayed there for a number of hours. Now, there's a ship on both sides of the pier. So it got up pretty late in the evening, really, shortly before dark. And now these are merchant ships, but all of the merchant ships had Navy gun crews on them. And they had one officer, and he was the armed guard officer for the ship. So the ship on the left side of the pier, the armed guard officer came down and he said, "Hey," he said, "if you're going with us, you better get aboard, because we're ready to sail." We're all looking at one another. Should we or should we not? Let's go. So we did have enough sense to grab all of our records and our equipment, and we got aboard that ship. And so they said, "Well, go down and find you, throw your stuff on a bunk." And so we did. And I got down on the 3rd deck before I found an empty bunk. But anyway, I came back up on deck, and we're passing Alcatraz Island. And then shortly thereafter, the Golden Gate Bridge. And that's the last we see of land, you know. So we sailed overnight. The next day, the armed guard officer got on the public address system, and he says, "Now," and by the way, there were about 1,200 troops on this ship, because it was a combination cargo and passenger. So, as I say, he said, "Well, now, as I call your unit, I'll tell you where to get in formation so we can have muster." Okay, so we're all 86 of us radiomen are just standing around, you know, waiting for him to call our unit, and he never did. So he finally came around with his clipboard, and when he saw us just standing around, he says, "Why aren't you guys in formation?" Well, so we're still waiting for you to call our unit. So, well, who are you? Well, we're 86 radio going overseas. And he says, "Well, you're not on our manifest." So anyway, 17 days of sailing, we wound up in Milne Bay, New Guinea. And they couldn't let us off of the ship because they had no orders for us. So we watched all the rest of them get debarked. And so we stayed on that ship 8 days. Well, we watched all the people go off, and then we watched all of the cargo. The cargo was 3 decks of 50-gallon drums of oil that was underneath of us. Now, the ship was sailed by itself, no convoy, because it was a Dutch ship. It had twin screws, or twin propellers. And it could make 22 knots, which would outrun a lot of submarines. So we went by ourselves, zigzagging, and the ship had made a run for it because the Germans was about to invade Holland, and they made a run for it to the States, and so they stuck them over in the Pacific. And they were the only person on the ship that could speak English was the captain. All the rest of the crew, of course they were civilian crew, all spoke Dutch. Now this was the MV Daystar. We crossed the equator on the 29th of July of 1944. I have my shellback card in my my wallet yet. That's quite a celebration, even in wartime. I won't go into that, but at any rate, I said that we stayed on the ship 8 days, and we finally got a message back from Washington saying that we should have gotten on the other ship on the other side of the pier, and we should be in Brisbane, Australia. Oh, great, we're going to Australia. Not so. They put us off at a receiving station there at Nolly Bay in New Guinea, and we stayed there a few days, and then a couple of LCIs came to pick us up, but they only picked up 84 of the 86. Now, where the other 2 radiomen went, I don't know, because we only had a half hour to get our gear ready and get down on these 2 LCIs. And they took us up the coast of New Guinea to Finch Haven, New Guinea, which was well, we went to this, there was a number of different outfits there, but this was a PT base that we were going to. And so then, right away, they had, in as much as they needed a bunch of radiomen, they said, well, now, have you fellows gone to signal school? No. Okay. We'll set up a signal school right here, because in PTs, the boats are so small that you have multiple duties. Now, if you're back in the States getting ready to go on PT boat, you got not only radio, but signaling as well. So they set up a school for 8 weeks, and we went to the signal school. Now, the code, it was just a matter of, instead of hearing it, you're looking at it. It wasn't difficult for us at all, but we had to learn semaphore with flags and so forth. So, after the 8 weeks was completed, we no sooner got out of that school, then they decided to put radar on those PT boats. And they said, now, all radiomen will also be the radar operators. Right back in the same Quonset hut for another 8 weeks, learning about radar operation. So then I had duty in the Radio Shack. Now, the purpose of us being there is because all these boats, from time to time, you know, people get hurt or go on leave and so forth, and they need replacements. So that's why the 84 of us were there on this PT base. But as I say, I was a little above normal of receiving and transmitting international Morse code. So right away they stuck me in the Radio Shack. But I was on there temporarily. They had temporary duty. Well, now if you got on a boat, then you were permanent duty, and then you could make a rate. However, I don't remember now how long I was on that first PT base. I remember I was old PT base 5 at Finch Haven, New Guinea. And then I was transferred up to another base. It was called Mios Windy, and it was MIOSWOINDE. And it was pronounced Mios Windy, and everybody called it Windy Island. Well, I was assigned to the Radio Shack temporarily, and in as much as that, well, the only way I could have been permanent if somebody would have gotten hurt, or, you know, they needed an extra man. Well, every unit is only allowed so many people. So if you're in there and you're excess, your temporary duty. Well, now, while I was there, I went into the mess hall one day, and I sat down and looked across from the table, and I said, "Hey, Bill, who's following who?" He looked at me. It was the other twin. And he said, "I'm Tom." He said, "I'm a cook." So I met both the twins a half a world away. So I have to tell you a little story there. The first day I was on Windy Island. Now it was a very small island, about maybe 1.5 miles long, and at the widest point, maybe 0.5 mile wide, but down where the PT base was, it was very narrow. At any rate, first day I'm there, why, I did get a chance to walk around a little bit, you know, because as I say, it was small, such a small area. And I went down to the beach on the opposite side from where the PTs were tied up. And I see a whole row of 50-gallon barrels filled with sand. And I thought, why are all these down here on this beach? Well, anyway, they announced on the PA system that they were going to have a movie tonight. And so right after dark, I thought, well, I haven't got any duties yet. I might as well go see the movie. And so the movie consisted of a bunch of coconut logs, and that's what you sat on. And they had a little camera rigged up, you know, and a screen. So the movie starts, and I'm there. I don't know hardly anybody, because after all, it was the first day there, and there were a few of the radiomen that I'd been with that did get transferred up to this island as well, but not all of them, because some of them did get assigned boats and were still down in New Guinea. So anyway, movie's going on just fine. Boy, all at once, siren starts. And immediately, all the lights went out. Movie, everything. And I didn't know what was happening. Well, I soon saw some action, because the other men around me started running. And they actually knocked me off that coconut log backwards. And I could feel them trampling on me, but luckily I didn't get trampled on in my head. But anyway, when I get up, there's not a soul around. And I thought, oh, this must be an air raid. And I do hear a sound of an engine. It was really a strange sound. I had heard airplanes before, never heard anything like this. But anyway, I thought, well, where am I going to go? And I was thinking about those barrels down on the beach. You know, it was filled with sand. I thought, boy, I guess that'd be as good a place as any. And so I ran down to the beach. Now, it wasn't totally dark. I suppose the moon must have been out, but I could see. Well, I went down to where the barrels were, and I'm looking around. There's not a soul down there among those barrels. I said, well, I don't know of a safer place. So anyway, I hear this sound coming closer, but it was a clackety-clack sound. It was not like any airplane I ever experienced before. It sounded like the engine about ready to fall apart. It was only one. Couldn't have been more than 1,000 feet, I'd say, high. I did not see it. The island was covered with coconut trees. And actually they have big branches. And it was right at the edge where these barrels were. But I hear this thing cluck, 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 and I thought it passed about the middle of the island, which would still be maybe 3/4 of a mile away. And I know it couldn't have been very high at all from the sound of it, but finally it went on. And so when the sound dissipated, the lights went back on. Of course, they had lights on, floodlights on various coconut trees, you know, to light up the area. And so I thought, well, where on earth is everybody? I walked down the row of barrels. I don't see a soul. So then I cut up through the coconut trees over to my tent. Now, we were living in big hospital tents. I think there were 23-man tents. Well, I walked in, and of course, there again, most of the people were strangers to me. They didn't act like anything had even happened, and I was too embarrassed to ask questions as to where on earth did these people go? And I never did find out. I did hear one fella say, oh, that was old washing machine Charlie going over. And that was the only air raid I was ever in. What a joke. But anyway.
But you don't know what those barrels were for?
No, but I would think that it was one of the most safest places you could be in an air raid. Now, they had air raids there before I got there, but that was the last one as long as I was on that base. Well, then I got shipped shortly after the Philippines was invaded. I was shipped up to a PT base on Samar in Leyte Gulf. And Leyte was an island and Samar an island, but they came together like this, and this was right up in the edge of the straits, and ships did use the straits, you see. And I was on that PT base, temporary duty again, until the war ended. So I was overseas 13 months on temporary assignment. And I helped tear that base down shortly after the war ended. And they shipped, after we tore all the tents down and everything, then they shipped us over to a receiving station to be reassigned or get out of the service. And so I'd like to back up just a little bit, because back at Windy Island, I could show you a purpose of why we were there. Now the island, as I said, was small, and it consisted of the PT base at one end, and then there was some Seabees, which do repair work and building and whatever. And then at the other end was an air base, a naval air base, and they had PBY Catalinas planes. Well, 28 miles from Windy Island was an island called Japan, Japen. And there was supposed to be approximately 30,000 Japanese soldiers on Japan. Now, Japan was never invaded. But the bigger ships, before I got there, took out all the boats and everything that, that they could find around Japan. So the duty of keeping those people, those soldiers on Japan, they were really prisoners, so to speak, because from sun up to sundown, the PBY Catalinas patrolled just far enough away from the island to keep away from the shore batteries. And from sundown to sun up, the PTs patrolled around Japan Island. So we virtually took 30,000 Japanese out of the war with, there might have been 1,000 of us. Maybe not even that many. So I thought I would mention that to show you why we were there. And whenever they would build a raft or a boat, well, being that the PBY Catalinas could really see what was going on, they would have the PTs to intercept them, because naturally they're going to try to make a break for it at night. And the PT boats would just idle very slowly. And they had what they called stations. And they would go till they met another PT boat. They would reverse themselves and go back until they met another. And it was just back and forth, idling away from the island. But it was completely circled the Japan. So, but they didn't take hardly any prisoners at all. Whenever they found the rafts and so forth, they'd just shoot them up. If they could swim, they could make it back. If they didn't, shame on them.
Did they have supplies or anything over there, or those people just cut off from?
Well, it was our job
To just keep
to
the
keep
hold up.
everything out. See, don't let anything come in.
So the Japanese never tried to go in after him or anything?
Not while I was there. But they did build rafts and so forth, and they'd shoot the rafts up. And as I say, they didn't hardly take any prisoners at all.
Now, after the war, did they get rounded up?
I I have read where they had dropped leaflets, not just Chapin, but there were many islands that were not invaded. And they did drop leaflets after World War II ended. I only read about it, but I do remember reading where they dropped leaflets, and try to get the people off.
Did you guys know what was going on around in the Pacific, like Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal? Were you aware of things that were going on around you?
Well, I was in Radio Shack.
Mhm.
I got a lot more information than most people. However, one thing about coding and decoding, you always have an officer that was a communications officer, and he would take the highest ranking enlisted man to help him, at least in the 3 Radio Shacks that I was in. And they would do the coding and decoding. A lot of times we would see the message after it was decoded, because somebody had to deliver the message to somebody, So I've read many messages.
Were you allowed to share information, or were you had to keep it quiet? Whatever you saw, you were allowed
Well,
to
yeah,
tell.
you didn't pass along information. The crew in the Radio Shack generally knew what was going on, but it was restricted. But now, can I continue a little bit right after the war ended?
Sure.
Okay. And I said that we tore down this PT base. I think it was PT base 17. Anyway, it was there in Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. Well, they sent us over to this receiving station where you get shipped out one place or another. And I was there just a few days, and I had orders to come back to Tacloban. Tacloban was the capital of Leyte. And we could see Tacloban from that PT base. It was that close. And so I came back, and I came to a floating dry dock, not a large one. This was an auxiliary floating dock. We only had about 28 men on there. But when I reported aboard, we only had one officer. And the skipper looked at my records, and he said, I don't need a radioman. He said, I need a signalman. I said, well, sir, if you look a little farther, you'll see that I'm also a signalman. And so he was very happy to hear that. Well, at that period of time, everybody's thinking about getting out of the service, going home. But you have to have somebody to do your work before you can be relieved to do so, to go home. See? So the skipper says, well, he says, in as much as you're also a radioman, he says, you can type, can't you? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, would you mind relieving the yeoman and let him go home? Now, a yeoman's duties are secretarial duties, typing letters and reports and so forth. And I said, well, okay, I can do that. He said, well, I'll tell you, if you take that job, he said, you won't have to stand any watches at all. He said, because you'll be making out the watch list, and don't put your name on there. I said, okay. Well, so that's signalman's duties and yeoman's duties. A day or two later, skipper came back to me again, and I'm starting to break in with the yeoman that's on there, and see what he's doing. And he says, oh, he said, would you mind relieving the storekeeper? He said, no, we don't order many parts. So he said, and he runs a little ship service, in other words, selling cigarettes and candy and shoestrings and whatever, you know, in a, well, it was nothing more than a big cupboard with a lock on it. So he said, I would appreciate it if you would take the storekeeper's duties also. And I said, well, okay. So anyway, I find out that the yeoman is also the mailman. And because he takes me over to the beach, and there's a Jeep over there, and we go to the Fleet Post Office to pick up the mail every day. So anyway, okay, now I'm the mailman also. Well, anyway, that was the only time in my naval career that I ever got out of standing a watch. Now on this this dry dock, the watches that they stood were fire watch. You have that no matter where you are. You have to have a fire watch at night. And everybody on there except the skipper had fire watch duties, except me. So, as I say, I was only on there for 3 months. But in that 3 months' time, now I told you before that I was on temporary duty all this time, and I couldn't make a rate. Well, inasmuch as I relieved a signalman, that opened up a spot. So the first month, I made seaman first class. The second month, I made signalman third class, which is the same as a buck sergeant in the Army. And well, I stayed on there, as I say, a total of 3 months, but I was on there about a month longer than I had to. And I got a Dear John letter from a girlfriend back home, you know, that we were going to get married when I come back to the States. Well, I says, heck with it. I talked to the skipper and I said, I'd like to go home. And he said, look, I haven't got anybody to replace you with all these jobs, but I'm not going to keep you from it because you've been here longer than you had to. So I went back to the States. And I was in the regular Navy, not the reserves. And inasmuch as I enlisted what they called a kiddie cruise from 17 to your 21st birthday. So I had a little time to do yet, because this is only 1946 now. And so they sent me to Bermuda. I wasn't in the States 60 days till they sent me to Bermuda on a fleet tug. And I finished my year out on the fleet tug. And then I got out of the service. I had 55 days leave built up, and I got discharged from Norfolk Naval Air Station, Norfolk, Virginia. And so after my 55 days at home, I received a discharge that had no signature. Had the name, but no signature. So I sent my discharge to the Bureau of Personnel in Washington, and they sent me a duplicate discharge with a letter. And so One other thing that I would like to mention is the fact that my dog tag said that I had type A blood. Well, I had never given any blood before, but in 1950, a friend of mine up here in Hamilton, his mother needed an operation and she needed some blood. So he asked me if I would give a pint of blood for his mother. And I said, well, I never have, but there's no reason, I guess, why I can't. And so I went down to Old St. Mary's Hospital here in Cincinnati. And after having them draw the pint of blood, they gave me a little card. It had my name on it and my blood type. And I looked at it and I said, this is strange. I said, now I can really remember my dog tag said I had type A, and you got on here type O, O positive, and then a little N and a little D, which was negative to the donor, which is me. So my blood type is O positive, but I cannot receive O positive blood myself. I have to have O negative. So he told me, he said, now, what would be best would be to put on the card O negative. Because if anybody saw that card and they only caught part of that information, they're likely to give you O positive blood and it'll kill you. So that was my story.
My goodness.
You got to experience lots of the bureaucratic problems of the Navy in your time. You got put on the wrong, you went on the wrong ship, you got the wrong dog tag, you stayed on temporary assignment, you got to experience all kinds of interesting.
Well, I can't help but believe that God was taking care of me.
Sure was, and it worked out for the best, didn't it?
Did you see very many natives down there in New Guinea?
Yes. When we went into Milne Bay, the ship stayed pretty close to the left side of the island, and along the shoreline, and I could see thatched huts built in a circle. Well, I was always interested in geography, and I can recall having a big geography book, I don't know, 3rd, 4th grade, somewhere through there. And it had pictures of, but if I remember correctly, they were pictures of Africans in Africa. But this was very similar because there was those thatched huts, you know, and right away I'm thinking, boy, oh boy, right back in my geography book. And I did manage to go to a village. And as I say, the village was built in a circular fashion, huts pretty close together. But if you walk between a hut and got into the inner circle, that's where the women and the children generally stayed. And when a stranger would walk in there, they would immediately go into, I guess, the nearest hut. Because, boy, in no time, there's not a soul out there, and there wasn't not a blade of grass. So, you know, it had to have been packed down from feet. So, yes, I did visit a village. Now, they did warn us not to go beyond the first mountain range. Now, New Guinea is very mountainous, and some high mountains. But because they warned us not to, if we're in our free time, and not to go beyond the first mountain range because of the headhunters.
Oh.
Now, I didn't see any headhunters.
Uh-huh.
I did not go beyond them, but I did go. A bunch of us did go up to 2 waterfalls on the side of the mountain. But that was.
So you were really
Frozen.
seeing the world. You were a 17-year-old kid.
I spent my 18th birthday in New Guinea.
Was that a shock to you to see the world where, this is so different. You're in the South Pacific. It's like a lifetime away from Columbus, Ohio.
That's right.
And that must have been, were your eyes just huge soaking all this in, or was it kind of scary?
No, it wasn't really scary.
It's fascinating for you?
Fascinating, yes.
Every place you were, it was tropical. You guys go to Bermuda, New Guinea, and some of these islands.
Yeah.
Was it beautiful water and sand? And
Oh, well, not all of it. Down through New Guinea, I didn't see but very, very little sand, sandy beaches. Most of them were mud. As a matter of fact, it was the rainy season when we got over there, which would have been about the last day of July of '44. And I can recall that there at Nolly Bay, where they had this receiving station, you had to walk like wherever you went down in that low area in the truck track, because it was just black loam soil, and it wasn't anything for it to rain 5 times a day over there in the rainy season.
were there snakes and bugs? Crocodiles?
Well, I didn't see any snakes at all. But now, I told you about going up to these 2 waterfalls, and it was a path that went up there. And you're going through jungle. Well, in a jungle, there's birds, there's monkeys, there's everything imaginable making noise. What is scary is all at once, it's totally quiet. For some reason or other, I don't know, but everything seemed to quit for a little while. And then they'd start up jabbering again and so forth. But to have that to happen all at once, I guess one warned another, I don't know, but it was just total silence. Maybe it was the noise that we were making. I don't know what it was, but I know it. Now that was scary, because you're wondering, you're hearing all these sounds around you, and suddenly there's nothing. Why? I suppose it must have been us, though.
Did you ever see any of the Zeros, the Japanese fighters fly by, or did you ever have any?
No, because that would have been an air raid. I got in there, every place that I went, the war had just moved on.
So you were sort of in the vanguard.
Yeah. As I say, I guess the Lord was saying, well, I got to keep you, I got to keep you safe some way.
Did you know?
That I was always, it was just always beyond me.
Well, everybody had a job.
And I wasn't, and that's right, you have, you make no decisions as to where you go, unless it's unauthorized.
Did you know what was going on? Some of the horrible things that were happening to some other people in other places. Were you guys aware of? There was pretty rough times in the South Pacific.
Well, I remember a little incident maybe that I should tell you about. When I was at Windy Island, there was a torpedoman that slept near me, and he would wake up screaming. Because, and I got to talking to him as to why. And there was one officer, he was a squadron commander, and he would ask for volunteers to go on the PT boat. And whenever they would run onto these Japanese that had built the rafts and boats and whatever, you know, well, now I said he was a torpedoman, but he was not. He was a motor mech. In other words, he was a mechanic for engines, because I remember him saying that he was down below. Now these PT boats are powered by 3 V12 Packard engines, and his duty was down there among the engines to make sure everything was running right. But he volunteered to go out with this, in this boat with this squadron commander, and they did come on to a bunch of them trying to escape. And they shot the, I don't remember, I think it was a raft and that they had built, and they were shooting the raft up and tearing it apart and whatever, you know. And naturally the Japanese jumped in the water. And he said that this skipper would take his boat and run right over them and put those engines in reverse and back down over them. And he said that you can't imagine the sound of bones being broken, you know. But everybody's an individual. But he never volunteered again to go out on a boat with that fella.
When that skipper was promoted on up later,
I don't know.
you know?
I couldn't tell you. I didn't even know that squadron commander.
Mm-hmm.
There was several squadrons of boats. It was generally, if I remember right, I can't remember if there was 6 boats to a squadron or 12. But anyway, well, I did want to tell you that, you know, I said there were 84 of us that was in PTs. 80 men out of the 84 was assigned to PT boats. There were only 4 of us that was left in the radio shacks that on temporary duty. So that was a pretty good average of out of 84 men, 80 of them was permanently assigned.
Uh-huh.
There was only 4 of us left.
And you got 3 jobs.
Well, that was later though.
No, man.
Did you ever find out where you were supposed to go? Had you gone on the other side of the pier and gotten on the
Yes,
right boat?
I think I mentioned that, to Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah, and you were going to be...
And I've read accounts where they trained the Marines there and formed divisions for like Okinawa and so forth.
So you could have ended up...
I could have been a radioman, and when you're in the Marines, the enemy generally concentrates on the officers and radio men, because you see what that does is cut your communication. So had I formed division with the Marine Corps, I would have made a landing somewhere.
Would have been a
But
different...
as you see, the good Lord kept me out of that.
That's right. And did you ever see any of those, you hear a lot of talk about the Navajo Indians that were code
The
talkers in the
talkers.
Pacific?
I didn't run onto any of them because you see, as soon as I got overseas, I wasn't with the Marines anymore. They transferred us there in New Guinea to the PTs.
It was an interesting situation, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Do you think your time in the Navy was valuable to you later in your life, Bob?
Well, I'll put it this way. Right after I got out of the service, and I was in Bermuda on that fleet tug, I went up, knowing I was going to get out shortly, I went up to the supply department and I talked to the civilian in charge of the supply department. And I told him, I said, now, officially I was not a storekeeper, but I know the standard stock catalog from having worked in that location. He says, you're hired. As soon as I told him that. So, yes, there was an opportunity there, you see, and I made the most of it because I took that job. And so I worked on a Navy base as a civilian. I worked in the supply department for about a year, and I was a grade 2 storekeeper. And another job opened up down in the boathouse for a property and supply clerk, and I was asked if I would like to have that job. And I said, I wouldn't mind. He says, you got it. I jumped from a grade 2 to a grade 4 property and supply clerk. And it all stemmed really from the volunteering of taking those extra duties on. So yes, it did make a difference in my life.
How did you feel about your leadership and the way you were treated in the Navy?
I was treated very fairly. I can't really complain.
Even though they forgot to sign your discharge paper, they sent it back and
That was no problem.
fixed it up.
That was no problem, really. That happened to be a lady.
Oh,
It was a wave. But she was real nice. While I had all those days coming to me on the leave, she gave me a 5-day leave to go see my wife. I got married just shortly before I got out of the service. And I'm still married to the same person. And May the 6th will be 56 years of marriage,
Oh, that's
well, that was the right choice, wasn't it?
I'm sure.
Yes. Well, thank you for talking to us today, for your service to our country.
My pleasure.
Any more questions, Betty?
No, it's just very interesting, just fascinating,
Thank you.
especially barrels filled with sand. Not knowing what they were for.
Well, as I said, the only thing I could figure would be for protection.
So I was thinking maybe so no one could land there?
Yeah, that's what,
No, I don't think so.
no.
I don't think so. It wasn't wide. That wasn't, those barrels couldn't have been more than 10, 12 feet from the water.
What a good-
And then it was coconut trees hanging over.
Oh.
So it was, nobody could have landed there except maybe in a helicopter.
It must have been interesting. You were so young, and you come in, and it's, I guess you don't want to ask people too many questions. You feel a little unsure. You know, you're a recruit, and the war's been going on. Some of those guys have been there. Even a few years must have seemed like forever. And here you come new, and you're far from home. It must have been a
I
very...
never got homesick.
Must have been a very interesting and
I never got homesick.
I have a son who's 14, and I think in 3 years of him going off like that, I just can't even imagine him
Yeah,
being
no.
mature enough to handle it. I guess you grew up fast, didn't you?
Yeah. I came back from the Philippines by ship and through the Panama Canal and up to New York. Care to guess how many days? 49.
Oh my goodness.
49 days from Tacloban Leyte to New York City.
You were around the world, weren't you? You went all around the world.
Yeah, and then on this fleet tug, we were all over the North Atlantic, picking up ships in distress and so forth.
Did you ever go back to New Guinea or down to Australia? You know,
Yes,
as a civilian.
yes. Here, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, we went to from Cincinnati to St. Louis, caught another plane to Hawaii. Stayed there a few days, went from there to Australia. Sydney's beautiful. We stayed there 4 days, I think, and went to New Zealand. Stayed there, I think, 4 days, and we flew from New Zealand to Tahiti, and from Tahiti, well, we stayed there a few days, and then back to Los Angeles, and then we flew back into Cincinnati. It was quite a trip.
Did it look different to you that time, the second time, when you came back?
Well, I wasn't there. You see, I wasn't in Australia. I was supposed to be there.
Mhm.
And
But that whole world in general probably was totally different
well, it was,
1943.
yeah, because you see, mostly where I was, it was natives. Even up in the Philippines. There was no paved roads or anything. And over in that little town of the